Hey, there's a lot of you out there that are currently waiting right now for mortgage rates to drop before you jump into the housing market. And while that may seem like a good idea, let me explain to you what investors are doing. That is, experienced investors. Now, in order to explain this to you, I'm going to want to show you two different graphs. Let's first talk about the average retail buyer, and that's just going to be your regular family, your first-time home buyer. When they're looking to go purchase a property, obviously one of the key things out there is going to be affordability. It doesn't really matter what the interest rate is. It doesn't really matter what the price of the home is. If you can't afford the mortgage, you're not going to be approved for it. You're not going to be able to buy it. So when rates are extremely high, there's actually a lot less people that can even afford the property. We call that the affordability line. But as interest rates start to drop, let's call that, 4%, the affordability starts to become more accessible for a lot more people that potentially could want to purchase a home. So for the most part, there's a whole range of interest rates that, just to be honest with you, regardless of what your strategy is, the average retail buyer is just simply not going to be able to go buy a house. However, as interest rates start to come down, you reach this particular period where the interest rate times the purchase price of the home becomes to be a payment that the average individual can afford. Again, we call that the affordability line. The problem is that what most retail buyers do is as interest rates come down, even when homes become affordable for them and they can qualify for the mortgage, they still hold back. Because as rates drop, the mindset is, well, maybe the rates will drop a little bit more. Yeah, interest rates are 4% right now, but what happens if maybe they go down to 3% like they were, just a couple of years ago? Well, the housing payment is going to be a lot more affordable. So most of them will do is they'll wait until their rates drop and rates drop and rates drop, and they get to this point where basically the rates kind of sit at the exact same period, maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year. And then the rates start to go up. It is at that point in time where most retail buyers start to enter into the market because they're thinking, okay, we've reached the bottom, rates probably aren't going to go down anymore, and now actually rates are even starting to creep up a little bit. I might miss the mark, and there's almost a panic buying that starts to happen. All of these buyers flood into the market, and that means demand goes through the roof. So as interest rates start to come down, and as they start to creep up, back down and up, as they start to creep up, the buyer demand goes from a low amount to kind of a mid-range once affordability starts to happen, but then really starts to skyrocket as interest rates drop. As interest rates go down, this affordability piece becomes exponential. People that couldn't afford a $300,000 house now all of a sudden can afford a $300,000 house because interest rates are low. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense to people. The problem with that is that as demand goes up, so does price. It is generally that the supply kind of stays pretty consistent. So if we have 100,000 buyers, let's say in any given market looking to purchase properties, and that goes up to say a million buyers, the demand for the exact same properties is 10x. And that 10x means competition, that means bidding wars, that means less concessions from sellers, and that means an ultimate higher selling price. So demand is in direct relation to price. Have you ever heard the term location? Well, location's important because people demand to be in areas with great schools, easy commute to work, where just there's stuff, restaurants and entertainment. Well, the demand is there. Demand equals higher price, which is why location is the actual most important part when it comes to real estate. Back to the chart. What investors do a little bit differently than the average retail buyer, and the average retail buyer can do this as well, but we're just not conditioned to it because we're just simply not taught this in our schools. Retail buyer or an investor buyer will buy a property even maybe a little bit higher than their affordability. So maybe the mortgage is $2,000 and they're only going to get $1,800 at a rental, so they're even losing money each month. They may even be okay with that because they're looking at it and they say, I'd rather buy a $300,000 house at 8% and lose money maybe for a year. But then as interest rates go down, they understand that that $300,000 house is going to be $330,000 or maybe even $400,000, and a $330,000 house at 4%, because they're going to take their original loan and refinance it to a lower rate, means that they're still going to get the lower payment that they would have gotten if they waited, but instead of having to pay $330,000, they're going to pay $300,000. They're going to use that equity when they do the refinancing to even pull some of that equity out to recapture some of the payment here, or maybe they'll just leave it in. It doesn't really matter. So what investors do differently, and what separates those, is obviously this is the principles of the rich that have been the same for generations, is they buy when other people are fearful and when nobody's doing anything, because they get the best deals, the best properties, the best negotiations, and the lower pricing, even though the money costs a little bit higher, because they understand markets and they understand the rates will eventually drop. And when they do, they can simply refinance the rate and they'll participate in the increase in value. As it's said in all of real estate, you marry the house and not the rate. When you're buying when there's low demand, you have a lot better selection. There's better properties that you can go and negotiate for than if there's higher demand where there's going to be a bidding war. So find the house you love as long as it's affordable to you, and then when the rates drop, you can always refinance.